The flies found them first, thousands of them, crawling across lips still frozen mid-screen, settling into eye sockets that had watched friends die hours before. The Persian soldiers who walked through the pass 3 days after the battle said the smell hit them before the sight did. And there, propped against a rock like a man resting from his labor, sat the body of a Spartan king. His name was Leonidas, and what had been done to him would have made lesser men vomit. Xerxes, the god king of Persia, had ordered his head removed, his body crucified, not because Leonidas had nearly won, but because 300 men, 300, had humiliated an empire of millions. And humiliation, in the ancient world, demanded an answer written in flesh. You know the legend. 300 Spartans, one narrow pass. A sacrifice that saved Western civilization. But the truth? The truth is darker, stranger, and far more human than any movie ever dared to show you. Because this wasn't a story about heroes. This was a story about politics, desperation, and a king who knew, from the very beginning, that he was walking into his own grave. The question is, why did he go anyway? 10 years before Thermopylae, the Persian Empire had already tried to swallow Greece whole. They called it the First Invasion. The Greeks called it a miracle. At a beach named Marathon, 10,000 Athenians had charged into a Persian army 3 times their size, and won. The Persians limped home with 6,000 dead. The Greeks lost 192. It should have been impossible. And in Persia, they never forgot it, never forgave it. For a decade, they planned. They built. They waited. When Xerxes finally marched, he brought something the world had never seen. Ancient historians, and yes, they exaggerated, claimed 2 million soldiers. The real number was probably between 100,000 and 300,000. But here's what matters. It was still the largest army ever assembled in human history up to that point. Imagine standing on a Greek hilltop, watching that army approach. Not for hours, for days, the earth trembling beneath their feet, the dust cloud visible from 50 miles away, rivers drunk dry, forests stripped for firewood. This wasn't an army. This was a nation on the move. And Greece. Greece wasn't even a country. It was a collection of city-states that spent most of their time at war with each other. Athens hated Sparta. Sparta despised Athens. Thebes trusted no one. They agreed on exactly one thing. They did not want to be slaves. But unity, that was another matter entirely. When the Persian ambassadors arrived years earlier demanding earth and water, symbols of submission, the Spartans had thrown them into a well. The Athenians had thrown theirs into a pit. Bold gestures, satisfying gestures. And now the bill had come due. If stories like this grip you, stories history books don't dare tell, take a second to support the channel. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me what country you're watching from. It still amazes me that we're uncovering these ancient moments together across continents. We're building something special here at History Without Borders. Now, let me tell you what the movies got wrong. Almost everything. First, there weren't 300 Greeks at Thermopylae. There were 7,000. Spartans get the credit because Spartans survived to tell the story, and because dead men make better legends than complicated coalitions. The Thespians who stayed to die beside them. Barely a footnote. The Thebans, accused of cowardice and largely forgotten. History is written by survivors, and Sparta had very good writers. Second, the Spartans weren't superhuman warriors sent by the gods. They were products of the most brutal military system the ancient world ever devised. At age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their mothers. They were starved deliberately, taught to steal food, punished only if they got caught. They slept on reeds. They were beaten regularly. Those who showed weakness were killed or left to die. By the time a Spartan reached adulthood, violence wasn't just familiar. It was comfortable. These weren't heroes in any modern sense. They were weapons. Human beings engineered for killing and obedience. And that's what made them so terrifying and so tragic. Third, the Persians weren't barbarian hordes. They ruled the largest, most sophisticated empire on Earth. They built roads, postal systems, and irrigation networks. They practiced religious tolerance centuries before Europe would even consider it. Xerxes wasn't a monster. He was an emperor protecting his legacy and avenging his father's humiliation. To call the Persians savage was propaganda then. It's laziness now. These were disciplined, professional soldiers fighting for an empire that, from their perspective, had every right to punish Greek arrogance. When you understand that, the battle becomes something more than myth. It becomes a collision between two worlds that both believed they were right. Thermopylae, the hot gates, named for the thermal springs nearby. It was the obvious place to make a stand. A narrow coastal pass squeezed between mountains and sea, barely wide enough for a wagon to pass. Here, numbers meant nothing. Here, discipline meant everything. Leonidas knew the terrain. He knew what 7,000 determined men could do in a space that negated Persian cavalry and reduced their infinite infantry to a trickle. He also knew something else. Something the other Greek commanders didn't want to hear. There was a path, a goat track over the mountains called the Thermopylae. If the Persians found it, or if someone showed them, every man in the pass would be surrounded. Dead. Leonidas posted 1,000 Phocian soldiers to guard it. He hoped it would be enough. It wouldn't be. For 2 days, the Greeks waited. The Persians made camp. Xerxes sent scouts, received reports, and, according to Herodotus, laughed when he heard the Spartans were combing their hair. He thought it was vanity. It wasn't. It was ritual. Spartans combed their hair before they expected to die. Xerxes sent an envoy. "Surrender your weapons," the message said. Leonidas's response became legend. "Molon labe." Come and take them. 2 words. In Greek, they're even shorter. The envoy returned with nothing, and still Xerxes waited. He waited because he still hoped the Greeks would see reason, that they would calculate the odds, 7,000 against 250,000, and recognize suicide when they saw it. He underestimated something important. The Greeks weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to buy time. Every hour they held the pass was an hour for the Greek fleet to engage the Persian navy at Artemisium. Every day was another day for Athens to evacuate, for Sparta to muster, for Greece to prepare. Leonidas wasn't trying to defeat an empire. He was trying to give his civilization a chance to survive, and for that, he only needed to hold 1 pass. A few days, however long his men could stand. On the morning of the 3rd day, a Greek traitor changed everything. His name was Ephialtes. He was a local farmer from the region of Malis, and for the promise of Persian gold, he told Xerxes about the mountain path. History remembers him as a villain. But picture this. You're a farmer. You've watched the greatest army in history march through your homeland. You've seen your neighbors flee. You absolutely know that the Greeks cannot win. The Persians will rule this land. They will remember who helped them, and they will remember who didn't. Was Ephialtes evil, or was he a terrified man who made the calculation that most humans make when faced with annihilation? It doesn't excuse him, but it explains him. And explanations matter more than judgments when you're trying to understand history. The Phocian guards heard them coming at dawn, leaves crunching, armor rattling. 1,000 men scrambling up a mountain in the dark aren't quiet. The Phocians had a choice, fight or flee. They fled. Not all of them, but enough. The path was open. A runner reached Leonidas while it was still dark. The message was simple. It was over. The Persians were behind them. By midday, they would be surrounded. Every man in the pass would die. There was no retreat. There was no rescue. There was only a choice. Leonidas made it for them. He ordered the allied Greeks to leave. Get out. Save yourselves. Fight another day. He kept his 300 Spartans, because Spartans did not retreat, ever, for any reason. Their law forbade it. Their culture demanded death before dishonor. They would stay. But here's what the movies forget. 700 Thespians stayed too. They weren't Spartans. They had no law demanding death. They simply refused to leave. Their city, Thespiae, lay directly in the Persian path. If the pass fell, their families died next. So they stayed. Not for glory, for love. 400 Thebans stayed as well, though historians still argue whether they were hostages or volunteers. It doesn't matter now. What matters is this. When the sun rose on that final morning, roughly 1,400 Greeks stood in the pass. And they knew exactly what was coming. The first 2 days of fighting had been slaughter, but not the kind you'd expect. The Persians had attacked in waves. The Greeks had held. The pass was so narrow that Persian numbers meant nothing. Their arrows darkened the sky. "Then we will fight in the shade," a Spartan reportedly joked. But arrows don't win battles. Men do. And man for man, the Greeks were better. The phalanx was a machine. 8 ranks of men, with overlapping shields, moving as one organism. The front rank killed. When they tired, they rotated back. Fresh men stepped forward. The dying never stopped, but neither did the killing. Persians fell in heaps. The Greeks stood on the bodies to keep their footing. Xerxes watched from a golden throne on a hill overlooking the pass. Herodotus says he leapt to his feet 3 times in rage as his soldiers fell. He sent his elite guard, the Immortals, 10,000 of the finest warriors in the empire. And they fell too, not because they lacked skill, because skill doesn't matter when you can only fight 3 men at a time. But on that 3rd morning, the final morning, everything changed. The Persians weren't going to attack the front anymore. They didn't need to. They were coming from behind. And the Greeks knew it. Leonidas ordered his men forward, not to hold, to attack. If they were going to die, they would die killing. They pushed out of the narrow pass into the wider ground beyond. For the first time, the Persians could bring their numbers to bear. It was exactly what Leonidas wanted. What happened next wasn't heroic in any clean sense. It was exhausting, mechanical, repetitive. Kill. Step forward. Kill. Again. The Spartans broke their spears and fought with swords. They broke their swords and fought with daggers. When those were gone, they used rocks, hands, teeth. Herodotus says Leonidas fell in this chaos. and that the Greeks and Persians fought 4 times over his body before the Greeks finally dragged it back. By noon, it was over. The Persians finally surrounded the surviving Greeks on a small hill. Arrows came from every direction. There was no shelter, no escape. The men who had held an empire for 3 days died in minutes, pinned like insects. The last Spartan to die was reportedly named Leonidas. Earlier in the battle, when told that Persian arrows would block out the sun, he had smiled and said, "Good, then we'll have shade." Now, there was no shade, only darkness. Xerxes walked the battlefield personally. He counted the Spartan dead. 300, just as Leonidas had brought. He asked his advisors why such men existed, why they fought when winning was impossible. No one had a satisfying answer. So he gave them one. He cut off Leonidas's head, impaled his body, and moved on. He would conquer Athens. Burn the Acropolis. Watch the sacred temples become ash. For a few weeks it seemed the war was won, and then the Battle of Salamis. The Greek fleet, trapped in a narrow strait, destroyed the Persian navy. The tactics of Thermopylae applied to water. Xerxes watched from a throne overlooking the sea. This time, he did not rise in rage. He was too numb. He retreated to Persia, left his army behind. Within a year, the Greeks crushed what remained at Plataea. The invasion was finished, and the legend of Thermopylae, already spreading, became something larger than itself. A symbol, a rallying cry, a lie that people needed to believe. Because here's the corruption at the heart of this story. Sparta used Thermopylae to build a myth of invincibility, while practicing a system of slavery so brutal it makes American plantations look gentle. The Helots, Sparta's slave class, outnumbered citizens 7-1. Every year, Spartan youth were sent to terrorize them, to murder them. It was considered training. The warriors who died at Thermopylae weren't fighting for freedom. They were fighting for a society where most people had none. The slaves who carried Spartan equipment to the pass, who cooked their food, maintained their weapons, weren't even counted among the dead. History didn't bother to record their names. They were property, not people. There's a monument at Thermopylae today. It quotes the poet Simonides. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." It's beautiful, it's stirring, and it raises a question no one wants to answer. Obedient to their laws. The same laws that demanded dead babies be thrown from cliffs. The same laws that turned boys into killers, and killers into legends. The same laws that crushed an entire population into permanent slavery, so that 300 men could train for war instead of growing food. Is that worth celebrating? Should we admire the sacrifice while ignoring what that sacrifice protected? Or does history demand that we see it whole? The courage and the cruelty, tangled together like blood and dust on a battlefield. I don't have answers. I'm not sure anyone does. But I know this. The story of Thermopylae isn't simple. It never was. It was complicated from the moment Leonidas walked into that pass, knowing he wouldn't walk out. He did it anyway. Maybe that's the point. Not that he was a hero, but that he was a man, flawed, brutal, complicated, who chose death when running was easier. Who stood in a narrow place and dared the world to move him, whether that makes him worthy of legend or just another killer who died in the dirt. That's for you to decide. But remember this. When the Persians finally pushed through, they found one thing scratched into a rock by a dying man. 2 words, the same words Leonidas had spoken days before. Molan Lab. Come and take them. They came. They took. And somehow, impossibly, those 2 words outlasted empires. Outlasted centuries. Outlasted everything. Maybe that's the real lesson of Thermopylae. Not that the Spartans were heroes. Not that sacrifice is glorious. But that some acts of defiance, however doomed, however flawed, echo longer than the empires they defied. And that, perhaps, is the most frightening thing of all. Because it means we're still making choices that will echo for centuries. We just don't know which ones yet. The path is always there. The question is, who's standing in it?